So in the last movie, we were able to incorporate Google Maps into our mobile application. Well, now we want to actually incorporate location data, and this is data that's coming off of the GPS sensor in the device. And we're going to use that to actually position the map exactly where the user is. So we're going to continue in this same project that we called Maps. The first thing we have to do if we want to access the GPS is we need to add a new permission in our manifest file. So I'm going to go to our manifest and go to the permissions tab, and we're going to click add. We're going to add a uses permission. And now we want to go to Android permission.access find location. This gives us access to finding the location based off of the GPS sensor or just using the network towers to be able to get a location, which isn't quite as accurate, but is still useful. This course location actually will allow you to only get the location based off of the network, not using GPS. So we're going to choose Access Find Location here. And we can see what happens here in the manifest file. We just have another permission that we've registered for, which is Access Find Location. So now we want to go back to our Java file. You can see here that we got a reference to our map view that was actually in our XML. But if we want to control the map, meaning we want to position it, set the zoom, do all those types of things, we actually need to get a reference to the map controller. So I'm going to create a new property here called map controller, and I'll just call it control. And to do that, we can say view.getController. So there's a method on our map view called getController, which will return the controller for our map. And this is going to allow us to use that class to manipulate the map any way that we want to. So now in order to get location updates, the first thing we have to do is to get the location service from the system. So we're going to create a new instance of the location manager class. And I'll just call it manager. And to this, we're going to say this.getSystemService. And the service is context.locationService. Like that. Now we're going to have to go ahead and cast that to location manager. But this basically gets us access to the location service. So one of the things we have to do now is to create a location listener, and this is going to be called anytime there's an update to the GPS. So we're going to create a new instance of location listener here. And I'll just call it listener. Is equal to new location listener. And we're going to use the anonymous inner type, so we can see now it's created a new location listener with all of the available override methods. So we have on status changed, provider enabled, provider disabled, and on location changed. Now obviously this is the method here that we're going to use the most. So anytime the GPS sensor senses a change in location, it's going to call this method, and then we can update our map to set the correct position. So when onLocation is called, what we want to do is to use our map controller to set the position of our map. So I'm going to say control. You can see we need to change the modifier of control to final because we're referencing it in this anonymous inner event handler. So I'm going to say control, and then we're going to call the set center function. And this is going to set the center of our map to wherever the location coordinates are coming in from the GPS. You can see here that this expects us to pass in a geopoint object, but the location here is actually of type location. So what we need to do is extract the latitude and longitude from this location object and pass it into a new geopoint object. So I'm going to say new geopoint. Now this expects an integer for the latitude and the longitude. Inside of this location object, we have two functions. One is get latitude and one is get longitude. So for this, we can say location dot get latitude. And then for longitude, we can say location new.getLongitude. Notice we're getting an error here. It's because this is actually providing double values that come out of this location object. So we just need to cast them to integers by just putting a int in parentheses here. So now again, anytime the location changes, we're going to set the center point of the map to that new location. So now that we have this listener created, the next thing we need to do is to actually register to get location updates. So remember up here we created this location manager. Now we're actually going to use it down here. So I'm going to say manager, and it's going to be request location updates. And we're going to use this second one, which gives a string provider. And for the provider here, we're going to tell it which provider we want to use. If we wanted to use the network towers, we could do that, but we actually want to use GPS. So the strings or the constants are actually in the location manager class. And inside of there, you can see we can choose from GPS provider or network provider. But for this example, we want to use GPS provider. For minimum time, this is the minimum amount of time to go between updates. If we are concerned about battery life, we can actually give a number here that will say, wait at least this amount of seconds before you do another update. For our example here, we just wanted to update as quickly as possible, so we're just going to set that to 0. Minimum distance is don't trigger a new update unless you're X number of distance away from where we are right now. So if I walk over 2 paces, we don't want it to spawn another GPS update. So we can provide a minimum distance here. But again, I'm just going to put that to 0. Lastly, we want to provide the listener, and that's the one we just created, which is called listener here. So now we're registered to receive these updates. Now I want to go into the browser here and go to the SDK site. And if you go to the dev guide and then location maps, obtaining user location, there's a really great write-up on all of the details that come into play when you're dealing with GPS and location data. This is actually a pretty complicated set of considerations here you have to take into account. So this kind of goes through and gives you information about how it's set up. And there's a whole set of different things that we can listen for here. Now, one of the things you might want to do is when you first come into your application, because it can take a long amount of time sometimes for a GPS lock to happen. So we can actually use the last known location that the GPS sensor signaled in on. And to do that, we can actually get this by using this location manager.getLastKnownLocation. We can provide that as a basis for when we first come into the application. And then after the GPS has actually locked on, then we can update it. So we can do that. Again, we can come through and read about all the different things that come into play for dealing with battery life and things like that. So definitely want to look at this article. It gives you really in-depth information about how to do this. Now I'm going to run the application. And let's open up the emulator. You're probably wondering at this point, wait a minute, this is an emulator, so it doesn't have a GPS sensor in it. So how do we test our application? Well, we can see here when it comes in, it's going to load maps, and it's going to load it at the default location on the map. And let me actually zoom in here a little bit. So one of the nice things is we can actually control this and feed the emulator fake GPS data. So if we go back to Eclipse here, and we want to go to Window, Show View, go to Other, and then under Android, we actually want to check out this emulator control window. So this allows us to actually do a number of different things, including make it seem like a phone call is happening and things like that. But you can see under location, we can actually provide a longitude and a latitude and send it to the emulator to trigger a change in location. So let's go ahead and send that. And now look at the emulator, and you can see it's actually updated this off the coast of Africa here. So again, by coming into our emulator control, we can actually put in any location data we want, send it to the emulator, and then we're going to be able to see those changes happening. And you can see here we have a little icon up here telling us that we have a GPS lock. So again, this is only scratching the surface of creating location-aware applications. Again, there's a lot that goes into finding the right balance between location accuracy and maintaining concern for things like battery life, because you don't want your application to be constantly searching for new GPS data when it doesn't really help your application, because that's going to really drain down the user's battery. So that's the basics of incorporating location data in, and I definitely recommend looking over this page on the developer site to give you more advanced functionality.